Nozomi.
Yes.
Tell us about your PhD thesis.
Well, so I started to write on the topic of Wikileaks since 2010 when the organization published the Colorado Matter video. And mainly my focus was to really look at significance of Wikileaks in empowering ordinary people. So it's more like a psychological effect of what this organization has done and the influence that Wikileaks has had, not only in terms of changing the media landscape, but more how it transformed the whole entire world and this current system of democracy. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
And so what did you find? What has been the influence of WikiLeaks on the ordinary human being?
Well, WikiLeaks really challenged the, I think one of the things that WikiLeaks has done really is to reveal the true nature of Western liberal democracy. And what that means is that, we have this word representative democracy. So because of the word democracy, we tend to think that we live in a democratic society. We have free press and freedom of speech. But the fact that what WikiLeaks and then its publication have revealed is that, we really don't have a democracy. And then this model of governance that we understand as Western liberal democracy, it is a form of control, and it's using the form of deception and manipulation and control of information, and how it is very subversive and it's more dangerous perhaps than outright form of oppression that we have seen in the previous era of colonization. So that was kind of a very interesting finding, and then how people within the system are, internally incorporate this oppression and engage in self-censorship, and they become complicit in the system to actually perpetuate oppression around the world. So especially people in the West, they tend to think that especially Americans tend to think that we have democracy and we have freedom of speech. And then when we think about censorship or surveillance, we tend to think about government like Chinese government, or Turkish government, or some other places not happening in the Western world. But I think what was interesting is that WikiLeaks has really revealed this is not the case, that we live in a fake democracy, and that this form of control has been exercised by using a particular model of governance, which I call Western liberal democracy. And it's a representative democracy, and then how the media and the journalists became gatekeeper, and then the serving to maintain this system of control.
Nozomi, you say
Yes.
that WikiLeaks invented a new form of journalism.
Yes.
With a number of new elements. Why don't you describe the WikiLeaks invention to our listeners?
Right. So, WikiLeaks not only just made existing journalism more efficient or better, it actually radically transformed. And in fact, it's created a new features and enabled true function of free speech. And then what I mean by that is that, as I said, in the existing model of governance, we have journalists working as a servant for power, and their role is basically to sustain secrecy. So Western liberal democracy uses secrecy. They hide their own agenda and what they're doing, and in order to hide their agenda, they have to deploy journalists, professional journalists, to work for them. And in WikiLeaks, not only revealed this function of control, but it's actually made free speech that has been captured available to everybody around the world. And the way that this organization has done obviously has different various core innovation that WikiLeaks has brought, made it available for that to happen. But one of the things, as I as Julian Assange actually always talk about, which is a form of scientific journalism. And then also the WikiLeaks has a breakthrough of technology, the secure Dropbox, which is the online anonymous submission box. And that was a breakthrough of technology. And then on top of it, WikiLeaks has built this groundbreaking way of doing journalism, which is the journalism as science. And in this existing model of journalism become art of propaganda. So it is nothing to do with science. It's the art of technique to manipulate public perception in order to control the populace. And then WikiLeaks actually made journalism to be scientific. It's backed by the actual data. So that's why WikiLeaks released the full archives and then give it to public in a searchable format, so that the people no longer have to believe, simply trust journalists. If they want to really understand how the journalists look at the situation and interpret, they have to simply look at the actual source documents. And then in this current form of journalism, this has not been made available, so that this current Western liberal democracy does not give us, not only doesn't give us a way to account for politicians, but it doesn't really give us, the citizens, people, to account for journalists who are supposed to inform public about what the elected officials are doing. So effectively, this the current democracy we understand is basically broken. It's broken beyond repair. And the WikiLeaks didn't just try to fix it. It actually brought a new form, completely brand new form, which is function as very democratic system. So this is a grand breakthrough innovation, and people don't understand, especially people who are trained to be journalists. They are the last one to understand this innovation, because what WikiLeaks does really is really enabling the true function of what journalists should be. So because of it, that WikiLeaks and Julian Assange have been so much attacked and became subject of smear campaign by The Guardian, for instance. And it's partially because I think the journalists, mainstream journalists are jealous of, what WikiLeaks has done, revealing so much, documents that exposing government secrecy in a level, at the level that no other media organization have done. But also, they simply don't understand. They don't understand this innovation. So there are two components, I think, that, some good journalists, I recognize that there are some good journalists within the institution, and they don't necessarily, they support WikiLeaks and they think WikiLeaks is a good force in the world, but at the same time, they lack the understanding of this new innovation, and therefore their reporting seems to be, to kind of end up just confusing public, or yeah.
I just want to let our viewers and listeners know you can find Dr. Nozomi Hayase at Nozomi Imagine, one word, on Twitter. And I would like to congratulate you on your thesis. I mean, I'm a person like, I suppose, most listening today who spent a fair bit of time thinking and reading about WikiLeaks, but I must say, your ability to encapsulate it as a kind of new paradigm, its sort of structure, methods, building blocks, strategy, I found it very fresh and insightful. And just that basic analogy that you make between the historical scientific method, where a scientist publishing a thesis would be required to publish all of the raw data upon which the thesis is built.
Yes.
And you are saying that Julian Assange has taken that scientific method and applied it to journalism through the searchable, the searchable archive.
Exactly. And then I think that is very courageous things to do. And then it's a real science, can actually change the world. Because, in academia and social science, political science, the researchers use creed of objectivity. And that objectivity is filled with biases and subjective opinions that are never being checked. And what because they do not release, they can manipulate data, and then when it's applied to journalism, where journalists are human beings, and as long as we remain to be human, we cannot be purely objective. So what WikiLeaks, I think, with this form of new scientific journalism brought is to, for me, it's the new creed of transparency that replaces journalist profession's objectivity. And what that means is that, recognition that we cannot become objective, and all we could do is to strive to become objective by disclosing our hidden agendas. And WikiLeaks, for instance, Julian Assange several times indicated that, we are not objective. We are objective, he said. We are objective, but we are not neutral. And then being neutral and being objective are two different things. So that Julian Assange, he made it clear that WikiLeaks' goal is to bring justice by means of transparency, so that organization, can connect with passion for justice. And at the same time, through the implementing the scientific journalism, the organization can bring real objectivity. And that real objectivity, was never available to us. And so I think that the significant aspect for me personally, and then I think for many people, especially people, who grew up, non-Western, who live in non-Western societies, they appreciate the WikiLeaks publication of Collateral Matter video. And Tricia Manning, the whistleblower behind, who gave that document, indicated that she wanted the world to see how the first world treat third world. And so in some ways, the people in the third world, people in Afghanistan, people in Iraq, they were made enemy to people in the United States, or other Western societies. And that what was revealed in the video was simply that we are all humans, and that they are not enemies, as mainstream media portray them to be. And that is real objectivity that we never had.
Yes.
So that is yeah.
When I read your material, I am reminded in some ways of M.K. Gandhi, and his philosophy he described as satyagraha, which was a mixture of two main elements. The first was what he called truth force, in which he said you must always, no matter what, without exception, tell the truth.
Right.
And the second thing he talked about was what he called ahimsa, which was the idea of love, the connectedness of all human beings. But when I look at, you seem to have quite a deep concern for the psychology of the individual, and for the role of freely speaking one's opinion to sort of psychological health and to daily life. I would love you, rather than me bastardizing your philosophy, can you give us just the thumbnail sketch of Nozomi's philosophy?
Well, I am a fierce advocate for free speech, and for me, Mario Savio, who is the spokesperson for free speech movement back in 60s in the US, and he described what free speech means to him. And for him, it was not a political, it was not a tactics to win political advantage, but he indicated it was something that represents the very dignity of what a human being is. And in some ways, I was born and grew up in Japan. And as a woman, Japanese, moving to the United States, I have to work hard to claim my right to speak in English language. And in this, Anglo-Saxon dominated world where everybody is defined by this, the single perspective, which is Western view in some ways. I recognize the importance of free speech and importance of being able to freely speak without referring to any outer authority, whether it's Western civilization or whether it's the United States or politicians or any kind of authority figures. And I think that for me, my philosophy, simply put, right to freely speak. I believe in everybody's right to freely speak, and this includes people, those of whom I disagree with. And to simply recognize that they have a valid perspective and recognize that perspective no matter how much I despise and how much I disagree with. And for me, in some ways I'm a free speech fundamentalist. But I guess I would like to say that's the way of the heart, because heart heart had radical acceptance of different views. And and I think that's, for me, sums up my own philosophy, that I wanted to connect everybody's ability to freely speak to our heart, collective heart, that allow different opinions.
Well, I'm absolutely loving it. I'm converted. I'm ready, to sign up. Can you tell our audience just a little bit more about your life? And what were the influences or events that forged this philosophy of free speech?
Yeah. So as I said, I was born and grew up in Japan, and I moved to. And in growing up in Japan, I look up to the United States with its ideals of equality for everyone, and especially the ideals that was stated in the Declaration of Independence. And especially, I really look up to the value of free speech and many of Enlightenment ideas. And as I moved to the States, I soon realized that United States no longer really, embodies these ideals. And in fact, when WikiLeaks emerged to the public limelight in 2010, and Pentagon and the State Department started to engage in the massive attacks on this organization, I find it such irony. I mean, it's more than just being ironical. I felt that betrayal in some ways, that this country that I so much looked up to is destroying its own ideals by going after this organization. And so, so for me, and then I also connected to Mario Sadio, the spokesperson for the free speech movement. And as Mario said, for him, free speech movement was not just a simple social political movement. It had a personal, spiritual dimension. And it was him freeing his own speech. And I also felt that this process of me discovering WikiLeaks, standing up for this organization for the last 8 years, I engaged myself in a form of free speech movement. And me writing, I started to write English as a second language. I started as a blogger, and over time I got better and better. I was able to articulate more, and I was able to free my own speech. And so it was, for me, the personal dimension is, WikiLeaks really started to carry on the real meaning of free speech movement at the global scale. And I'm a countless people, ordinary people who are affected by this organization, who are empowered, who learn to claim our own right to speech, and that we, ordinary people, are powerful. We are very powerful. We are not just the, people who are just passively just watching this game of democracy, or only engaging in politics every 4 years when new president is on the ballot. That's not our function. We have power, and I think WikiLeaks really engaged me in the process of free speech movement. And I am still engaging, of course. And then for me, Julian Assange's freedom. Now he's placed in a very difficult situation. He has been silenced, and now he lost. He was pressured, and that he's silenced. And now I think it's our responsibility to defend his right to free speech, because he helped us. He helped each single person on this planet to claim their right to free speech. And what WikiLeaks has done was, this organization was, not just by telling about it, speaking about it, but through its courageous action, taught us that we have power that is available, and we can claim this power, no matter where you are born, no matter who which nationality you have, which language you speak. You have this right. That is your sacred right that you can claim. And so for that, I think Julian Assange has done tremendous service for humanity. And I think it's our responsibility and our job to now defend his right to free speech and free him. So I am very committed to doing anything I can to free him, and defend WikiLeaks' right to publish.
Nozomi, I think one of the things that a lot of people feel, in my judgment, is that they may well be sympathetic to Julian's cause.
Mm-hmm.
They may well be grateful for the benefits of transparency arising from WikiLeaks.
Mm-hmm.
They may indeed feel that WikiLeaks makes the world safer, as I believe it does. But when you look at the what I think of as the bully in the playground, or the bullies, the intelligence services, and you look at the lengths to which the deep state has gone to personally damage the reputation, the livelihood, in some cases, indeed, the lives of those who have stood up for free speech. So what is your counsel to those who may be fearful about truly stepping into the light of transparency and staking a claim for free speech, those who fear the repercussions? What do you say to those people?
I think that, this world, that the system of control, the Western liberal democracy, it is already crumbling. It is on the last day. U.S. empire is crumbling, and that, it's now safe for you to speak because the public is with them. And I want them to understand, that majority of us want democracy. Majority of us really care about justice and transparency. And it's just the mainstream media distort that reality and make us think that, empire has power. But I want people to know that when you act out of courage, it would create a ripple effect, and it would inspire others to do the same. And we are there, always there with them. And that, when you take courageous action, we are just supporting you. So I think that, each of us have to do it, not just whistleblowers. I think that the people who stepping in to support WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, they are also taking courage, making a personal statement, and then taking risk in many ways. And I think that if more and more people do it, certainly it's become easier. And that I want people to know that you are not alone.
Okay, well, look, my instructions are that Joe Lauria is about to interview George Samuli. You and I have done our job. You can find Dr. Nozomi Hayase at Nozomi Imagine, one word, on Twitter.
Thank you for having me.
You are inspiring us. You have educated me. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thanks for your leadership in the cause of free speech.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
All right.